Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. And I have only one thing to say. The future must be really, really cold. So let's all rub our hands together and talk about cannabis, a warming subject. So the reason that Alan, and I'm a big fan of this group's work, I think it's doing amazing stuff to promote intelligent conversation. But the reason Alan asked me to speak is because I've been a bit of a pioneer in the arena of cannabis extraction and thinking about cannabis as a medicinal alternative to be taken very seriously. One of the taglines of my company, which is Constance Therapeutics, is we take cannabis seriously since 2008. So in doing so, in taking cannabis seriously, we've been exposed to the future and we've been able to help create a little bit of the future, and that's beginning to accelerate at this point, and it's becoming very exciting. To give you a brief idea about the trajectory, is back in 2008, I was facing probably fairly certain early death from a disease that had made me an invalid for about 15 years. I wasn't able to leave the house to go to movies. I had dropped out of most relationships because I was a pretty boring person. I wasn't expected to live much longer because I'd taken some drugs called biologics. One of them is called Humira. I'd actually taken all of them, but that was the last one I took, and those were the last drugs that could be used for my autoimmune disease. So when doctors said no more, and probably a heart attack from inflammation in your body is going to happen sooner rather than later, I, in desperation, turned toward cannabis. I did so fairly reluctantly, and that seems kind of odd to say at this point, but if you just think back 10 years, it wasn't so odd for someone who was a successful business person in the previous part of their life and who had never really wanted to go through life inebriated or stoned. It wasn't usual for us to take the medicine of cannabis seriously. But I've paid for my sins and my ignorance by bringing cannabis into a world where it is taken seriously. We've attended scientific conferences around the world now for 5 years. The situation in the US does not reflect what's happening across the world about cannabis science, and that's the good news. So, in taking cannabis seriously, what we did is I secured some patents. They've just been issued, so we have international patents on compounding of our formulations, which we pioneered in various disease states. And we have our process patented. So that has given us a chance to standardize, to look at what works with people, what people's physicians and what those people tell us works. And so over the past 10 years, we've developed some just practical knowledge of how to work with people with very potent cannabis extracts. It's been a pleasure to help open up the medical community and the world at large to what plant-based medicine can do. So how did it happen, really, that this came about? And I'm not an activist. I say that science is my activism, but you can't be in this industry and not be aware of some very, very lopsided events that have occurred. So back in the 30s, we all know now that cannabis was outlawed and that it had nothing to do with anything except racism and economics. But that led to a very long period of time in which we were told it was for other reasons. So that's one important event, kind of how we got to where we are today. The second is that factory farming, corporate farming, using intensive methods with synthetic fertilizers began at the end of World War II. Now, most of us in the Bay Area are aware of this, but this is actually kind of news to a lot of the world, that when farming practices changed, our health changed. So since the late 40s that we've been on an experiment. We've been on an experiment of seeing factory food processing instead of indigenous food practices. And we've seen synthetically derived pharmaceuticals dominate the health scene. So how come with this grand experiment that's breaking the world's coffers, it's creating, economic divide in this country, what the costs of healthcare are, why are so many of us sick? Why are epidemic proportions of autism in Silicon Valley happening? Why are cancer rates 1 in 3 men, 1 in 5 women? Why is epilepsy running out of sight? So we probably all have our theories, but it is all combined to get into a situation in which cannabis has been able to be a magnet about the change that's needed in the healthcare system. And I would suggest what is needed in the healthcare research system. So one of the things that I'm hoping is that all of the attention as cannabis becomes legal around the world is that we understand the hypocrisy and the brokenness of our current double-blind clinical model system. Not that there are certain aspects of it that should be preserved, but real strategic thinking ahead, actual current thought about where we are, is that we have a completely broken research system. We spend billions of dollars to develop pharmaceutical drugs in the help of actually helping our health every year. And yet 97% of that pipeline creates nothing. What the pharmaceutical industry turns out is 3%. And within a year and a half, those 3% of successful drugs that are brought to the public, 1/2 of them are taken away because of disastrous unintended consequences. So a huge pipeline of money creating 1.5% of usable products a year. And it's all based on the notion that we can best live with synthetically produced single molecule drugs that do one thing. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think it's pretty easy to understand that when you have a system, that if you push super hard at one thing, things pop out in unexpected ways, right? Is it really surprising that these drugs actually kill us in ways we don't expect quite a lot of times? Now, I'm not anti-drug, believe me. And one of the most exciting things that's occurred in our life as a company is that we are now in research under FDA approval in Canada with a pharmaceutical company. So that was a dream that I didn't know could occur in the 10 years that we've been in existence. And we really hope to be able to go through those normal pipelines and offer ourselves in traditional ways. But we think there has to be a difference. There has to be a difference away from the synthetically reproduced single molecule medicine. And that's part of why cannabis speaks so loudly. Is the pharmaceutical industry has become impatient because they've seen that actually when you treat one thing at a time, when you push super hard at one point in a system, unexpected things happen. So they're also looking for drugs that are more powerful in a suite of aspects that will do multiple things. While cannabis is one of the most powerful polyphasic drug delivery systems known in the world. And also, if I can circle back a bit to the history, one of the reasons we haven't seen that efficacy come forward in pharmaceutical channels is because it doesn't work nearly as well when you synthetically reproduce it into a single molecule of THC. Now the world's in love with the single molecule of CBD. It's our new heartbeat in cannabis land. And since I was the first in Northern California, according to Steep Hill Labs, to produce CBD extracts, I feel that I'm really on good footing to say CBD is amazing, and we're learning more all the time. But the workhorse of cannabis is THC. So let me tell you a little bit about some hard scientific research done at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Roger Putri is one of the lights of cannabis scientists. He's a professor there, and he's done some brilliant work exploring whole plant extracts versus single molecule drugs. And what he did is he took in vitro, so that means only in a Petri dish. We're not yet dealing with a mammalian body, but in a Petri dish, he put glioblastoma cells. That's one of the most virulent cancers known. It's brain cancer. And at Constance Therapeutics, doctors say that we've had incredibly great results working with their glioblastoma patients. So this study was of particular interest to us. So what Roger Putri did is he tested synthetically isolated single compounds of THC against the glioblastoma cancer cells, and he saw it work. And then he took synthetically reproduced CBD, he saw it work. He put them together and they worked much better. He then moved to the next level and he took naturally derived compounds of THC from the plant and naturally derived from CBD from the plant, and he put those and he tested the THC there, and he found that it was more effective than the synthetic THC and CBD combined. So now the best result. Then he did the same with CBD, similar, not as effective as the THC, but more effective than everything else. Combined them, most effective of all. Now, you know, most of us have a bias now, especially in the Bay Area, I think, towards the fact that plant molecules could be more effective in our bodies than synthetically derived ones made out of petroleum. But what is next, I think, is really kind of radical, is that he then took a whole plant cannabis extract, combining as many of the 512 bioactive compounds as they could preserve, and that was about 10 times as efficacious as all of the rest. So I like to say that whole plant medicine for humans is not the past, it's actually the future. And last March, I was lucky enough to be in Israel at Canatech talking there on a panel with Raphael Meshulam's partner, developing synthetic molecules, and with a biosynthesizer, developing biosynthetic molecules from yeast of THC and CBD. And I said, well, I'm probably going to be the sacrificial lamb here talking about whole plant extracts in this pharmaceutical company-oriented convention. But at the end, the room's consensus was very strong that whole plant extracts are the future. And I think does this mean I'm out of time? I believe I am. Is that right? Maybe not quite. Sorry about that. So there's other revolutions happening that I think will bring us all back to more and more to plant-based care in mammalian bodies. And I say that because we've also effectively worked with dogs and cats for quite a while, vets referring the very sick ones to us. So it's not just for humans. Any mammal has an endocannabinoid system, and it's going to be effective there. But it isn't just cannabis. There's the artisanal local movement, there's the organic movement, there's paying attention to terroir. And that turns a lot of us back to where did my food come from, where does my medicine come from? There's the nutraceutical revolution, a company that I know a fair amount about because a medical director worked with us, Life Plus. In February of 16, they had done $10 million a month in Germany for, I think, several years. February of 16, they suddenly did $40 million that month. That's the strength of the trend of our interest in nutraceutical products, and those products are primarily plant-based. So the cannabis revolution is bringing research globally. Our participation in that at CT is that we have been able to become a company that is licensing globally, licensing to pharmaceutical companies in Canada, licensing to consumers in Europe and in Israel. So it's a pretty exciting time in general. Some of the most exciting work that I think that is foretelling the future comes from Israel. But I want to just make a note for all of you that actually the most medicinal clinical information comes from Northern California. And the Israelis are very, very anxious to get our history, the clinical experience we've had, the time we've had to develop these formulations. And people in Canada, the New Brunswick government, the province of New Brunswick, is in town this weekend. They are also becoming a real force in the world, for being a hotbed of innovation, research, and economic empowerment in a pretty poor farming-oriented province that's now looking to lead the world in cannabis. So it isn't all just happening in Israel. And Raphael Mechoulam did identify THC back in the 60s, but honestly, there's a lot more exciting things happening. I wish they were happening at Stanford. I wish they were happening at Cal. I wish Northern California would start claiming our heritage, because in cannabis, we have a big, deep one. So thank you all, and I believe that if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now and in the back.